This is the Haulin Assets podcast where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Haulin Assets podcast. I am Craig. Over there, he is
Chris.
Chris, welcome back.
I'm back.
This is
Can't get rid of me.
Well, I keep trying, but this is episode number. I have no idea because we don't know when this is going to air exactly. But we are going to continue on with some listener questions. We solicited these for our 100th episode. You guys really came through, so thank you so much for submitting your questions. We really appreciate it. We got so many that we had to split it into 2 episodes. So that's what we're doing today. The first one, if you missed it, was episode 104. So go check that out. Chris answered some really good listener questions in that one. Very, very good, solid advice, practical advice. And I was there too. So today we're going to take on a few more. And Chris, I say we should probably just dive right in right after I tell people to go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com, buy a shirt, find us on Facebook, all the stuff, right?
Ask questions.
Ask questions. Yeah, absolutely. We love answering questions. So with that being said, Chris, how about we hear from Barry?
Let's listen to Barry.
Ready? Here we go.
Okay, so this is Barry, and my question is, are there avenues to produce the same amount of income in a local delivery situation as opposed to the over-the-road? And if so, what avenues are those, and what is the earning potential?
Well, there you go, Chris. There's Barry's question. I think it's a pretty good one to start off on.
That's a really good question. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, the first thing I would say is that typically if all things considered are equal, and
which is always true.
For example, you're going direct to shipper, whether it's local or over the road, or you are using a broker, local or over the road. If those things are the same, you're probably always going to make a little bit more money over the road than you will local. But if you, let's say, for example, let's flip that a little bit and say that you are working direct with shipper local and you're working broker over the road, there's a really good chance you're probably making more money on a local route. And so I would say to kind of answer his question, Barry's question in another way, is you can make a really good living hauling mostly local. It's going to be a little harder, and it's probably more reliant on you being able to have direct relationships with shippers, and you've got something regularly and consistent set up, probably with 1, maybe 2 shippers.
It reminds me of when we talked to Bubba Blackwell, did an episode with him, and he talked about finding a route. I think it was a flatbed route, if I recall correctly, and it was pretty consistent.
Hauling for new core steel, and it's it's the same thing. It's like really consistent. That's a perfect example of that's how you can make money.
And that wasn't local per se. I think he was crossing a couple states, but it was the same
one night
route.
at a time. It wasn't. He wasn't staying out for 10 days at a time like a lot of our drivers are.
Okay, all right. Cool. So what else do you want to say about this one?
So the other thing that I would say is one of the reasons that oftentimes local doesn't work super well if you're going with brokers is because if you're using a broker is always going to try to find the cheapest possible carrier to haul that load for them. And a lot of the times, when you're doing local stuff, short runs, those are the kind of loads that a trucking company is looking for to get, say their driver ended up in point A and they want to be home at point B, but it's only, 500 miles away. They'll take a load like that at a discounted rate to get their driver to where they need their driver to be. Or if they've got a good paying load in point B and they just need to get the guy to point B to get the good paying load, they'll take the cheaper ones. So you're competing with guys like that, and it gets really hard to compete and make good money locally when you're competing
you're undercut by the big guy.
Yep. You're undercut by somebody that just is trying to pay for the fuel essentially.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So should we move on? Do you feel satisfied with that one?
I think that's a good one.
Okay. We're moving on to Eldwin, who had a question on buying someone else's authority. I thought this was fascinating. What a good question. All right. Let's hear from Eldwin.
Okay. In episode number 9, insurance, you guys discuss how expensive insurance was for new authority. So my question is it possible to buy or to transfer someone's authority if they're retiring, if they're getting out of the business? My thinking is, if they've been around 5-6 years and have a clean record, can you buy that authority and run with it? And would it allow you to have quote unquote cheaper insurance rates?
Well, Chris, what say you?
Yes,
Really?
it is. It is possible. There's a lot that goes into that. So
Okay.
the short answer is yes, but it's way more complicated than you would think. It is possible to do, and there's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing it. And the term transferring authority is oftentimes used synonymously, but it can mean a couple different things. So let's talk about what I think is typically the cleanest way to do it. Is you're not just transferring authority, you're buying the company. Like if you've got somebody that's wanting to retire, maybe they've sold off all their trucks and all they really have is the company itself, and you can buy that, and you can probably buy it relatively inexpensively. And yes, you probably can save an insurance with some caveats there. Oftentimes the insurance company, if they can see there's been a transfer of ownership, they may or may not give you a break on that. So it doesn't always work out that way, but there's other benefits to it too. Like we were talking in the first episode where we were answering listener questions. You step into an aged authority, and so you're probably going to have an easier time getting loads. Brokers are less likely to care that you just changed ownerships. They just look at the MC number, see its age, see it's been around for a while, and you're good to go. So buying the company, that authority, so you're keeping the same name, you're essentially keeping a lot of the same stuff with the company. You're just buying out the other person. Everything kind of transfers to a new owner.
Right. So that's the simplest, maybe not easy, but simplest way to do it.
It's the simplest way to do it. It doesn't, there's sometimes reasons that won't work for people,
Right.
but that's one way to do it where the actual transfer authority is kind of the cleanest.
But what are some more complicated, difficult ways to do it?
So the other way to do it is you can technically transfer an authority. So you've got an MC number that's with trucking company A, and you want to transfer that MC number to trucking company B. You can transfer MC numbers, which is typically what brokers and shippers look at. You cannot transfer DOT numbers. So even if you transfer the MC number, you have to keep the same DOT number.
And that gets solved if you bought the company outright in that first solution you're talking
in the
about?
first solution, you can typically, you'll get the DOT number, you'll get the MC number, you get everything. But if you're transferring authority from one trucking company to another, you're going to have to get a new, either have a DOT set up just for that company, or it's already had one, you're transferring the authority. That gets more complicated. There's a lot more that kind of goes into it. It's not a super simple process. This is where you need to get somebody like Motor Carrier HQ, one of my other companies that does this kind of thing for people all the time. Even if you don't use Motor Carrier HQ, use somebody. Don't try to navigate that process on your own. It's more complicated than you would think, and you want to make sure you do it right, and it doesn't cause you worse problems later on down the road.
Right. Now, I imagine that it's not always the best idea to do this, right? I'm picturing a situation where you buy somebody's authority and it turns out that, they've got something of a tarnished record or something, right? You got to do your due diligence before you go out and just say, hey, this will make my life easier. It might not.
Yeah, there's actually a couple things we've seen this happen a lot of times that you need to kind of be careful of. One is that safety score, whatever the safety score the company had before, that gets transferred with it. And so if they had a conditional safety rating, or if they had other kind of safety issues, you're inheriting all that. And that may be a bad thing, and maybe a reason where it's just better to start over. When I say start over, it's better to just start with your own clean slate.
Right.
And not transferring the authority. The other thing that you kind of need to keep track of, and this is a little bit harder to figure out, is reputational risk. Like if they were just a bad company to work for, brokers didn't like them, they'll get blacklisted by lots of brokers. And so you may find out as you're, getting into this, that you go and try and haul a load for, a big brokerage out there, say maybe Landstar or something, and Landstar has blacklisted that MC number, and they're never going to let that MC number haul another load for them. And that can cause, obviously great big nightmares. And so that's another thing you kind of want to keep in mind when you're considering transferring an authority from somebody else.
Right. Now, Chris, I see you've got like a checklist here. Do you want to go through this checklist, or should we put this in the show notes? What do you want to do with it?
I'll probably put them in the show notes. It's basically, there's things, these are the steps that we take at Motor Care HQ every time we go through this. You have to set up an LLC, or sometimes you have to change the name, you have to change EINs. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things that you may or may not have to do. They don't always apply. That's kind of why I don't really want to go into them, is because they're different for every situation.
And this is why you're saying let the professionals
handle it. Yeah.
Okay, it makes sense.
There's a lot that goes into it, and every situation's different. And so there's a lot of variables, and it's just not it's not clean.
Right. Well, anyway, it was a great question. So thank you, Eldwin, for the question. Chris, let's move on to Darron. All right, let's see what Darron has to say.
So my question was just about the market in general, and mainly truck prices, because truck prices have gone up so much because of the supply shortage. So I was just wondering how the timing of buying your first truck would affect your success in starting your own company. Is the timing very important, buying your first truck, or should you just go for it, you think?
Okay, awesome question from Darron, in part because I think this touches on something that you talked about a lot at the beginning of this show. So if people listen to the first 20 episodes or so, they'll hear you talking about this in some depth. But as I recall, Chris, you beat the drum a lot of, look, if you are psychologically and monetarily ready to do it, jump in. There's never a perfect time. But are there any caveats to that? How do you want to take this question on?
It's such a good question because it's something that's on a lot of people's minds, and it's something that you hear across lots of different industries, not just in the trucking industry. Whether you're talking about real estate, or you're talking about the stock market, or trucking, trying to time the market typically is
a fool's errand.
It is a fool's errand, because right now, I mean, everything looks like not everything. There's more concern that we're heading into a recession than there has been in the last, we'll just say, year and a half.
Right.
But we don't know that that's going to happen, and it very well may not. And so if we say, no, I'm not going to buy a truck now because who knows what's going to be like in 6 months, I'm going to wait 6 months, and in 6 months, the things turned around and just kept going up, you've missed an opportunity. Then you're going to be asking yourself the same question 6 months from now, and you're going to be like, things are just going up, I'm not going to do it. And you're just going to continually kick that can down the road. So when it comes to investing, and when you're starting a trucking company, you're investing, it's typically not a good idea to try to time the market, because it's just going to make it so you kick the can down the road. I can't tell you how many people in not just trucking, but in lots of other businesses, when people know that you're an entrepreneur, they always talk about starting businesses. And I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people where they've just, I'm waiting for the right time, I'm waiting for the right conditions, I'm waiting for this, I'm waiting for that. Well, if you're doing that now, you're probably always going to be waiting.
Right. Narrator, 8 years later, he finally bought his truck.
Yeah. So that's my first kind of answer to that question. What I would say that you do is like you were talking about, what we've talked about throughout this podcast, especially early on, is just getting the fundamentals right. If you've got the fundamentals right, so you're mentally ready to do it, you've done a lot of the other steps that we talk about in startup, and you're financially ready to do it, don't worry about the timing of it. If you overpay for a truck today, and you've got the good foundation, you've got the good fundamentals in place, you're going to be able to weather that storm, and you're going to be okay. So I would say don't try to time it. Make sure your fundamentals are good.
Right. And yeah, I mean, like you said, this is a risk. You're investing in yourself. You're investing in your future. All investments have risk, but you can mitigate those risks. And I would say this is something, I was actually really pleased to hear this as I chatted just a little bit with the people who were submitting these questions. they would say, hey, when is this going to air? I'm almost caught up. I'm on episode 80 something or 90 something. I'm almost caught up. And I was really pleased to hear that it seems like most people are actually starting from the beginning and listening through the whole journey. So I hope most people listening to this have already kind of gotten those lessons. If you haven't, if you started this podcast recently and you came in on some recent episodes, I would strongly encourage you to go back to those first 20 episodes. Hey, start at episode 1, whatever. But go to those early episodes if you're thinking about starting out, because you and I, Chris, for the last 20, 30, 40 episodes, we've been talking about, okay, how many trucks are you adding this month, or adding this year? It's a different kind of mindset than that first year that you were out on the road. So a lot of good tips in there around questions just like this one.
For sure. And this podcast itself is really intended to be listened to from episode 1 on.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. So anything else on this one that we want to go through?
There's just a couple more things, or one more main point that I want to make with this is, could there be a crash coming up? Yes. But you never know. There may be, there may not be. It's always the case. There's always that looming out. The market always goes up. It always comes down. That kind of thing's always happening. One of the things about a bad market is a lot of the times the best opportunities happen when the market's down. And so if you're not in the game at that time, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of those conditions. And really, that's when people oftentimes make the best money. And then you probably won't be around in the game when things do turn around and just about everybody makes money. And so don't try to time it. But what I'm hearing in this question from Darron is, you're nervous. You don't know if it's time to take that step. You want to feel safe. You want to feel protected. And that's totally understandable. And, you're trying to protect yourself. And what I would say is, don't protect yourself by waiting for the perfect conditions. Protect yourself by building a company that can withstand the storm, and so that you are around to take advantage when the good opportunities happen. So just focus on those fundamentals, make sure you're mentally ready, you're financially ready, and chances are if those good, strong fundamentals are there, you're going to be successful, no matter the conditions.
It's remarkable to me, Chris, how similar that advice sounds to the advice that you have been giving as the company has grown. Hey, you want to build a fleet? Here's what you need to. It's the same thing. Get your fundamentals, understand your business, all that stuff.
Yep.
Weather the storm. All right. Well, thank you, Darron, for that one. We're going to move on to Kevin. Kevin had a question about hiring that was a pretty good one. So let's bring up Kevin here.
The hiring market is extremely tight. What most of us out here are struggling with is hiring drivers. What other tips do you have for hiring drivers? For example, getting people to respond, actually follow through with interviews and phone interviews and such. It's a strange market out there.
So, Chris, it's an employee's market, not an employer's market right now.
Kevin, brother, I feel your pain. I'm going through the same thing. It is tough. It is not easy. And the people that can kind of figure out the hiring, recruiting piece are the ones that are going to be the most successful. And in my opinion, as tough as fuel is right now, the hiring piece is probably even tougher and more impactful on your business than just the fuel pieces.
All right. So what specific advice would you give to somebody like Kevin who wants to grow that fleet?
I want to tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to answer that question adequately in the time that we've got in this episode. This is going to be another episode that we revisit here in the next little while and try to go into a little bit more detail. There's a few things that we're kind of experimenting with right now that we're trying out, that if we find that they're successful, it's something that we will absolutely share on the podcast. So let me tell you a little bit where kind of our biggest resources have been for hiring drivers. The first one is referrals. Probably half of our drivers that we've got right now have come from a referral from another driver. And do you know why that works or how that works?
You enlighten me. I don't know.
Well, there's a couple things. One, we pay our drivers for somebody that that comes on. I can't remember exactly how the breakout goes, but we pay them a little bit within the first like month, and then we pay them a little bit more at the 6-month mark if the driver's still around. Well, I would say not a little bit more. It's actually a pretty good chunk if they're around for 6 months. And
so you're incentivizing your own employees to help grow the company.
And on top of that, but the way that it really works is your drivers have to enjoy driving for you. You have to be a good company to work for, or they're not going to refer people to you. And so that's I think one of our biggest recruiting tools is the culture that we've got and how we really try to put the drivers, make them a priority.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So outside of that, I mean, if you're trying to hire your first driver, that's not going to be much of a tool for you, right? So what other tools do you have in your belt?
So our first driver got hired through a local job board, essentially, and that's where one place I would definitely start. So local job board, or then just even other job boards like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, even LinkedIn. They've got some ways that you can post. They're not super cheap, but neither's having a truck sitting. And so oftentimes just you need to pay the money to recruit. You've got to put money behind recruiting. It's not something that's just going to happen.
Right. It takes money to make money, Chris.
This is one area where it absolutely does. Yep.
I'm the cliche machine today.
You are. Yeah. It's
okay.
Very impressive how good you are with the cliches today.
That's what I do. So so those are online resources. Any offline resources that you can use?
Let me talk about a couple. One of them that we've had a little bit of success with is talking to drivers when we're out on the road. Like if Nate and I go deliver a load and there's drivers sitting around, we'll shoot up a conversation with them, and pretty quick you can find out if they, a little bit about them, if they like where they're working for, and then, if they fit into your model of what you do. And so, whether you're at truck stops or you're at shippers, receivers, or just anywhere you can possibly interact, or you just see a driver park around waiting, go talk to them.
Right. You never know what door is going to open if you just have a conversation.
We've hired a couple drivers that way.
Yeah. Nice.
Yep.
And let me ask you this. Were those drivers the ones that you talked to, or has it ever happened where, hey, you talked to somebody at this receiver and then they told a buddy, and that buddy is the one that you hired? It's kind of that networking.
We've had both happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Nice. Yeah.
So I think it's a good way to go.
Cool.
Let me talk about a couple of things that we're experimenting with. And these are the things, if they work out decently well, we'll talk a little bit more about them on the podcast. But one is we've started putting signs in our trucks. Some of our drivers, when they're taking a 34-hour reset or they're taking a vacation or something, their trucks get parked on roads that have traffic on them. And so we've started putting signs in the windows of the trucks, drivers wanted, with a phone number to call. And we've actually had we just barely started doing that a few days ago. We've already had at least one phone call from it.
Nice.
And then the second thing that we're starting to do is Facebook. We're starting to do some Facebook ads, and that's another option. And that's one that I'm cautiously optimistic that it will work well. I've talked to other trucking companies that use it and have found some success that way. And so as time goes on, if we can get it to work, we'll talk in way more depth about that in the podcast.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Chris, I think we have one more question to get to. We've got Tony. Are you ready for Tony?
Let's go to Tony.
All right, let's go to Tony.
This is Tony, and my question is, I've had my Class A CDL since 1992, and I have a family of 4, and I wanted to try to find another way to feed them. So I wanted to buy a rig, but the rigs are really expensive nowadays, and I want to know what kind of advice can you give me to get off into doing my own trucking business.
All right, so pretty similar actually to what we got from, was it Darron, who was asking about the truck prices and whatnot. So Tony's saying he's had his Class A since 92. He's been working construction, he was telling me, but he's looking for a different way to feed his family of 4. So but with truck prices being what they are, it's tough to start. What advice do you have for Tony?
So the first thing that I would say is don't look so much at the truck price. It is important. It is something you need to consider, but if freight rates are such that you can make money even with a high truck price, there's no reason to be afraid of a high truck price. And I would say you look at over the last 18 months, truck prices have been really high, but freight rates have been really high, and you've been able to make good money even with higher truck prices. So it's made sense to jump in and do it. And so this
Now, the rebuttal to that, of course, would be that rates aren't always going to be that high, but my truck payment will if I buy it now, right?
It will, but truck payments really, they don't make up a huge portion of your overall expenses. If you think about it, you know how we've been talking a little bit in the last couple months, we've been talking about percentage of expense to revenue. I wish I knew off the top of my head what the percentage of expense was for our trucks and trailers, but it's nowhere near the 25% that roughly 25% that drivers are, roughly 25% that fuel is. It's nowhere near there. So the cost of the price is in a truck is not typically going to be what breaks the bank on whether your company is successful or not. Again, this is going to go back to my same answer to the other one, is just make sure your fundamentals are good. And if your fundamentals are good, even if you overpay a little bit for a truck, it's not gonna cause you to go out of business.
Right on. All right, Chris, that was 5 questions, 9 total. So again, go listen to episode 104 if you missed it, and we answered a bunch. Oh, okay, I'm being pretty generous with the we here, but we answered a few others in episode 104 as well. Thanks to everybody for sending in questions. Chris, do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Just want to tell everybody thanks, for being listeners, for keeping the podcast going. And this is kind of part of our 3-year anniversary celebration, and it's pretty cool to see so many people that enjoy the podcast and like it and get benefit out of it. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I would say when you're at that receiver and you're bored and you're striking up that conversation, maybe slip Haulin Assets in there somewhere. Let them know there's a good podcast out there, especially if somebody mentions, hey, I'm thinking about taking the plunge. Well, I hope that we can help with that. So, Chris, I will see you in a couple weeks, and I hope you have a good one.
You too. We'll see you then.